Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather here tonight is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. Excuse me for one moment as I turn off the sound from the laptop behind me. Just part of the glories of all this technology surrounding us. We are here tonight, of course, to celebrate Dennis Cooley and his collaboration with Michael Matthews, the incredible book, Gibbous Moon, published by At Bay Press. Michael Matthews is sadly unavailable to join us this evening, simply due to technical restrictions, but we will be celebrating his work throughout this evening, and you'll see some of his incredible pieces on the screen immediately to my right. And for all those of you watching on YouTube, it will also be visible on your screen too. So we do hope you enjoy the pieces that will be made visible to you. This event, of course, also features a conversation hosted by Robert Enright. I'm keenly aware that I'm the least interesting person who will be speaking from this podium or these chairs tonight, so I'll keep my comments brief. The only thing I will ask is that while you are in this space, unless you are speaking up here, we ask that you please keep your mask on. We are in a performance space, so we're able to sit beside one another wearing our masks. As soon as we leave this space, we will be entering the realm of retail. So at that point, we would ask that you continue to remain masked, but also socially distanced. And that will be for the signing that will take place immediately following this event. And I'll be up with some thrilling housekeeping notes about signing procedure immediately following the event itself. Otherwise, Dennis will be up here to read a few pieces from this collection. Following that, there will be a conversation of the chairs to my left. And then following that, there will be a Q&A. During the Q&A, just to let you folks know in advance, as it seems unwise to circulate a microphone in a crowd during these times, I will ask that you simply ask your question to me, and I will then reiterate it into the microphone. With that in mind, I will gently ask, as my brain is completely scarred by COVID, to simply keep your comment to a question, please, rather than an extended comment, as there is no way I will do justice to the eloquence of your words. There will be plenty of time to speak to Dennis immediately following during the signing line. So thank you all for your indulgence on that point. Before we bring up Dennis, I'd like to say a few words about your host for this evening. Robert Enright is a Winnipeg-based art critic and teacher. He is the senior contributing editor to Border Crossings magazine, whose latest issue, dedicated to photography, very nicely complements the title we're celebrating this evening. He is also the research professor in art theory and criticism at the School of Fine Art and Music at the University of Guelph. And in 2005, he was made a member of the Order of Canada. Some of you will be familiar with the work of Dennis Cooley, who has lived most of his life on the Canadian prairies, where for over 40 years, he has been active as a teacher, editor, poet, critic, anthologist, publisher, mentor, and of course, one of Winnipeg's most prominent supporters of writing of all kind. His work has been immersed in family, the prairies, and a play with form. His most recent titles include The Home Place, essays on Robert Croce's poetry, and 2 books of poetry, Cold Press Moon and The Bestiary. His recent poetry collection, The Muse Sings, which is another gorgeous book published by At Bay Press in 2020, was nominated for a Manitoba Book Award. Please join me in giving a raucous welcome, both virtual and physical, to Dennis Cooley.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. The modesty of the man is extravagant. I'm going to take a minute. There's so many people to thank, and I'll do this as quickly as I can. But I think it's important to say this. I'm very sorry that Michael Matthews couldn't make it. He was by far the more important figure in doing this book. We'll hear more about this later. I expect. I hope Robert will get a chance to talk about this. But he put together these amazing photographs, what he called photographs. They seem to me, in my naivety at least, not photographs, but paintings. In any case, they're gorgeous things. When he showed them to me, I was just stunned. And he said, tentatively, I don't know why he was tentative, he said, would you be interested in a collaboration with these things? And I said, I wouldn't mind working with you with these things. So we went on these things crazy. And after a while, we got something together that seemed presentable. And we sat at the Grove, actually, he and I, over coffee or a beer, saying, what are we going to do? What's to be done? And I said, well, I know a guy at Bay Press who does strange things. He might actually take this on. And so Michael got a hold of Matt Judy. Matt Judy said, yeah, this is great, let's do it. So that's what came out of the wonders of the two of them at work. So thanks to Michael, and I'm sorry, as they say, he's not here. He could contribute so much to our event. At Bay Press, of course, did a great job in doing this book, as you've seen, as they always do. I wanted to mention also Matt Stevens, who helped design this book, and Alana Brooker, who helped lay it out. I want to thank my family, Diane, and Dana, Megan, and those who are here you are, and those who are out there on the web. We don't know who they are, listening and talking. And certainly, before we move on, Robert Enright, when I saw the posting for the event, I was frightened. He said, my God, who would be interviewed by this man? Who could handle an interview, this intense face looking out at you? But here we are. So pray for me. And finally, this book is dedicated to Sterling and Dana. Okay, selections to read. I'm going to read about a dozen poems from here, selected at various points across the book. And here goes with a piece called To Make the Stone. In my selections, I realized I've probably had something of the making of the book together, kind of collaboration. A number of these pieces deal with issues of making and how you might make things and how you might work across various modes to work. So this is called To Make the Stone. You probably know this quotation, it's famous, but this is Percy Shelley. Poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were familiar. And we have a more modern version that perhaps you know even better, that poetry is to make strange of the world. So here's a poem called To Make the Stone. When you spin it from your fingers and it skips on the water, clatters across ice, also in your head, a small stone that may bruise, which could be more than an octopus perforated from knowing. Your heart, if you wished, could be an erratic from the last ice age. The cattle rub, loving its hardness, its perfect scruff. You probably know this. You know those buffalo wallows? You all know those, of course, but you know where they came from, right? In the days when we had buffalo, when they needed to comfort themselves, they would rub against stones, right? And you've seen this in domestic cattle, right? They're rubbing against posts and wires. So the buffalo would do this around these stones, and they would do it so much they would just wear hollows around them. So the erratic, of course, as you know, is a trail of a big stone from the Ice Age. So, to make the stone. The dance. Perhaps reminiscent a bit, as Robert Enright has noted, I think in his notes, of William Carlos Williams. You know, his poem about the rust, the dance. The dance. Long reach of the arm, bone in its case, rack of bones. Long bones in the arm, long bones in the leg. The tibia, the fibula, lift them out of the crate. They've slept their life in. Let them out, let them escape. Themselves raw, let them. Play, let them diddle and fiddle. Oh, let them dance once they've left the past. They have been creased or cast in. Let them go a little, if only. For a moment, they would enter and skim and scud. All the bones jingling the flesh. The bones jingling, the leg bones keeping time, hip bones into the ulna, the radius circle, carrying you through, tip, step, do not stop. And a fallout from another occasion, a crow poem. I did a recent book in which there are many crow poems, and this is a piece that no one wanted until now. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Matt. Crow creates the earth. I'd written a huge, long poem. It was about 10 pages long. It was horrifically long and impossible. But this is a small piece condensed and improved. So it only takes a minute. Crow creates the earth. He works fast. All animals then, bay, chestnut, flaming, foxy, reddish, sandy, and gods even, Titian, Rubicon, lines going back once we have crossed and are entering in. A red letter day is surely for crow, day and night, alpha and omega, the start to everything. To paint the rich, dark red, the sound of closing, your eyes in the light, the umbilical and fruiting world. To defy the dead, to fly such a day. Oh, redness of fruit, the redness is all the redness of red. The color of your dreams. It's virtually impossible to see these things at that distance, I know, but this is the accompanying image. You get some glimpse of it, at least, to this poem about to read you. Magnificent image, I think. The color of your dreams. The gray wool blanket you draw every night around your shoulders, and what you might say all the way up to your eyebrows. Yet you go rested, awakened by the terrible yearnings that walk the sidewalks of your dreams. In stagey dispersals you must have known were only rehearsals. You spend the night wishing to be profligate with words, rubbing your eyes that smart from never saying. Lie awake, eyes wide open, talking in tongues, angels lying next to you, speaking wetly in your ear, small streaks and spatters of blood, flashing with crimson desire. Hark when you play it. This one's so brief, if you wink, you'll miss it. Wires so tiny a person can hardly see or bear to hear it clink in the breeze. The all alone sound, tin can, whenever you speak or are spoken. Glass. And again, Susan, pardon me, but the image here just is unbelievable, I think. You'll see, of course, in your copies. Glass. The window, a great emptiness. Behind it, blind as a mirror when no one is home. And then the small rooms we can, for a moment, enter. and Gibbous Moon. I was ecstatic when this image showed up, one of the first ones, and I said, "That's it. That we're doing it. I want this." And I very quickly, despite my reticence, bullied everyone else into saying, let's make this the title, Gibbous Moon. Make the title of the book, and they allowed me to do that, and I'm glad. Gibbous Moon. It is love binds us to the humpback moon when it sprays and blinds us to its constant straying, who, tiring of our romance, is sliding away 1½ inches. In a year and a day, one day will roll off like a lumpy rock and abandon us. It stays flighty and impecunious, a penumbra, and what of you I remember. My wife tells me I should say things about these poems, but I can't think of anything to say about it. Robert Enright's going to have to do his work. Get these comments. I perhaps say a little bit. We'll get there too. The poems in this book are in some ways very different from what I've ever done. Not only a matter of degree, they tend to be short and imagist. They're not very narrative for the most part. They're for the most part impersonal. So mostly you'll know, those of you reading the stuff that I do, I tend to work with narrative and vernacular and comedy and personal familial stories. But here we are with these kind of tight imagist poems, which I like to read. And sometimes you can even find them. Glass. We did glass. Now we're on to comfort. Take comfort in big ones. Again, very short piece, comfort. You must not think you are on the dark side of darkness. You must not think it is not a little lonely there. And far shores. The poems, by the way, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about this more. I didn't write the poems for the images for the most part. Michael had this wonderful store of images that were staggeringly beautiful and varied. And he said, "Have you got some poems?" So I sent him poems. Now, he had a lot as well. Over the years, we worked together. And many of you will know him more famously as a composer, as a musician. And over the years, he had, I guess, on half a dozen occasions, used some of my stuff for some of his work. But this time he says, "I've got these images," and he said he got some poems. So I didn't, for the most part, write poems for what he showed me. I found, selected, rewrote, and wrote poems in what I thought was in keeping with the tone. And I resonated really strongly with this. It just seemed to me a perfect kind of material for me to responding to or sending to, I guess. So Michael inspired the thing, and he largely did the gathering and selecting. And I think he did a wondrous job. So that's true for most of the pieces, not all of them. But anyway, here's Far Shores. Far Shores. Something I would say to you. Oceans on far shores. Little seas at your ear. The words on a string. Small kids and old men fumbling. Cold faces in which we breathe. Ice Age. This picks up a trope that we saw a moment ago, the glacial rock, the erratic. It was not a glacier, though there was an enormous weight that made a depression and it did fill with ice water, and more rain. When he closed a gate softly behind, and the moon turned to agate. Three more. This is Chimera. You have heard the flies, the comma, toes of spiders, their finicky lines, the lies we tell ourselves and one another. The phonograph we know is in cinema as sunwriting. It smears on eyes and walls. The shapes and colors we lay in doodle and doodle and dabble, trick the mind or enable. Writing you also know is negative, that it in speckles struggles to rise from the paper. To say what we would say if we knew what we thought, or what we thought we could say to one another. Then this one is you could read it in hundreds of different ways. It's basically the looseness of grammar and syntax and intonation, so you get radically different readings of it anytime you pass through it, and I'll give you one. But then, when is there? There is now, and there now will be, whenever we see after. All that is all that. Now we were when then was now, and there was here when we speak. There it is, again when it is new. When we are, there then. There it is then. This is when. This is after. Just before this then. And the last one, we return. This book, as I was telling Christian Enright just a moment ago, is a partial survivor's not the word, but a recovery from a book I did a long time ago called This Only Home. And it's called We Return. All our days and beneath our gaze, whales, seals, buffalo, migrate across great canyons, migraines in a cosmic brain, except for the beauty they sweep in. We weep, have been away, have grazed the cosmos, braided light and darkness that fell upon us, lightning that days from heat let out. Great doors closing and then opening, blips of light small as decimals. Our capsules were and our hearts contained. Winds and rain beneath us. And we may be a little crazed from an airless time, but we come back flying, we are afraid. We might touch the infinite charm of our germ garment. And these are small and infinitesimal lives. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much. Okay.
We'll ask people afterwards whether that's true or not. whether we're live. It's wonderful being up here. You know, I was hearing Dennis read. One of the reasons I came here was to work with Dennis and David Arness and to be a PhD student. Like most things, I didn't finish it, so I failed at it too. But sometimes failure takes you in other places, and so the places I've gone maybe were more interesting in finishing that damn PhD. But you know, Michael Matthews asking you, Dennis, do you have any poems? It's like asking Lucifer if he's got any sins. I mean, what did he expect? Did you have a few poems to send him? So he should have prayed too, you know, when you asked him that. You know, this book, by the way, I should say quickly, I'm not here because I'm a failed PhD student in the department that Dennis taught in. I did do an introduction to the book. And so there's a legitimate reason for my being here other than failure. The book has 78 poems, I think, and 81 images. One of the most difficult things we had to work out was how many of each there were, right?
Yeah.
But what interested me about that, and the reason I even asked about that, was you two have done something quite remarkable in this book, and that is to take two art forms. While there is a tradition for the photo poem, but to take two art forms that operate in different registers in different languages and make them work somehow together. How did you, I mean, I know that Michael did a lot of the organization, but how did the two of you work through that process, Dennis, that made it work in which each of the art forms you're working in could declare themselves and have a place in the book?
Well, I guess we both were confident in what we were doing and confident in one another and saying, you know, what do you want to float here? Michael said, here are all these images and here are some that I'm especially interested in. Have you got anything? And so I went through my stacks of manuscripts and take some notes and wrote a few things and started sending across things that seemed to me fit. I mean, the real sense for me of a tonal fit was very strong from the outset. I just thought it was a gift, just handed this to me.
The images themselves,
Yeah.
where you talked about the shock of seeing them the first time.
Yeah.
What was it about them that you found so compelling?
Well, I'm very simple about art. I like strong colors.
You can hang it above your couch, right? Right.
But they're really varied and very textures. A lot of them are very tactile. You know, if you look at the book, you see that some of them, it feels like you can just touch them. You're going to feel kind of oily surfaces on them. They're incredible sense of a surface with what he's done. I mean, I have no idea how he's done them. Mm-hmm. But I've always been interested in I mean, I don't know how to say this without sounding pretentious. The cosmos, but those things in the sky that move around, I guess. And it's been central in quite a few of the books I've done. So it's something that is, I guess, the haunting of the word that fascinates me, excites me. Really. So he's doing images that are strange and odd, but wonderful. He makes the stone stony.
Yeah. Your sense might have been, Dennis, that in fact, your book, This Only Home, which is a book that dealt in fact with the cosmos, the sky's cosmonauts, that might have been an attraction that he had towards your poetry as well, that you had already entered the terrain of the cosmological.
Yeah, he chose actually several poems from that, including the last one I read, that he put into play. So that was a good part of it, I think. He over the years has gathered most of my poems or books, and from time to time he sent manuscripts. So we had a kind of stock of material there. But it was this that really caught me. I spoke to my wife and said, "Look at this." She said, "Oh my God!" Looking at what those images were when they came in.
You know, you remarked on it in talking about Michael's about the textural quality of a lot, that you felt that they had a real texture, even though they're in fact just they're an image on a two-dimensional surface, so they don't actually have texture. Yeah. But one of the things that I admire about what both of you has done is a kind of shift in scale. That the cosmological, the big image is there, the big space is there, but so is the intimate gestural space as well. And when you talk about the textures that you sensed in his images, he can render an image that makes it look like it's a huge skyscape or landscape or seascape, at the same time that he gives you the small scratch across that surface. So did the two of you recognize that what each of you were doing was being able to handle both the kind of almost microscopic and the larger vision, and that both of your art forms were operating inside that terrain?
This could be, we never talked about it. It's funny, we sent things back and forth and talked about what we got, how's it looking as a combination, but we never talked aesthetics, never talked philosophy. I think it was just a meeting of this work that just seemed to fit for us. But yeah, I mean, I certainly think in the pieces I was writing that there's a strong sense of a large planetary forces, whatever, and then inside that very tiny human moments.
You know, one of the poems you read talks about crimson desire, and when you talked about you have a simple way of approaching visual images, I was thinking of the book, of Michael's images in terms of palette, and I would think that red and blue are two of the colors that continually turn up, which the crimson desire is both about the sort of the heat of passion. It's also about blood. The image of blood comes through the book a lot. In drawing together the poems, do you think, and I'm asking you to speak for Michael, that he was aware that there was a palette built into your poetry that he could then either replicate in his images, or that he could match his images with your poems in that regard?
We well have. I mean, very smart man, and very careful, meticulous man. But my guess is that we both work pretty instinctively. Saying, what does this feel right? Does it fit? By the way, one of the first poems he chose, and the only long one, is a poem about a whale. What do they call it? The whale master's wife, or whatever.
Right.
So it's a long poem, and accompanying it is a kind of blue object that could very well be a huge whale, or image rather.
The poem, your poems in here go, the earliest ones I think are in 82.
Yeah,
the most
very
recent
few
ones in June of this year.
Yeah.
Did the poems that he had to choose from were from a pretty wide range of your writing then? You were happy with the fact that he could go that far back in your poetry?
Yeah. A lot of them were never been published either, right? I mean, they were sitting around the manuscript, and I worked on them, or wrote some old notes and put things together. So yeah, I'm happy to grab the things. I rewrite stuff all the time.
Yeah. You also wrote 5 or 6 poems specifically for this collection. Was that to correspond to images that Michael felt didn't have an equivalent?
Yeah. He said, I can't find one for this. And I it was hard for me with one. One of those I was actually happy how I ended up. There was an image was kind of here I am with my color scene, my trouble seeing color. It was excerpts. The way I describe it. It's in here. It's in here. The images of a landscape, a scene that's almost desiccated in color. And what am I going to do with this? As I said, I like the bright colors. What was I going to do with this one? But I came up with a piece that I think worked okay. Yeah, there is excerpt. And there's the image you might be able to speak to a bit, or you couldn't speak out of an eye to that image.
And there's an example of that textural sense you have. A lot of these things look like they've been rubbed. The hand had talismanically rubbed it right down to blood almost.
Yeah.
I mean, they do have a textural quality.
Yeah, and the scratchy, it looks like broken concrete. Anyways, that impasse, and I finally came up with something.
It's interesting, one of the things that Michael talks about, he prefers to think of these not as photographs, but as images.
Yeah.
And he goes to Ansel Adams, and Ansel Adams' famous phrase is that nobody takes a photograph to actually make a photograph.
Right.
And so that Michael would argue that in fact Photoshop played as major a role in making his images as did the lens of the cameras he was working with, because in fact a lot of the time they're images that you think you're recognizing something in them that is in the real world, but in fact it might be in a sense created inside the Photoshop world. Yeah. That's a question of, you said you didn't talk about art, but that's a question of his art as well. When you read the Crow poem, the one that you said was part of a larger landscape, of course, as soon as I hear poem, I think of Crouch and What the Crow Said, and I think of Ted Hughes and Crow. And in fact, reading throughout this book, I heard echoes of other poets in the same way. In looking at the images, I saw echoes of everyone from Harry Callahan as a photographer to Schwitters as a collagist. Were you aware that both of you were working inside trajectories of image making and word making that we'd also inherited from the traditions that you come out of? You as a poet, who you know so much about poetry, can you actually make a poem that doesn't speak to you through other poems?
No one can.
Yeah.
No one can. No, it's quite seriously. You say, I can, and you say, yeah, Harry had a lamb. Well, there are all kinds of words and forms behind that. That every poem is derivative.
And you don't mean that in a pejorative way.
No,
you mean it in a very
it's
positive
inevitable.
way. Yeah.
And in fact, for the most part, it's good. You can't be original. You try to make a good pass, an interesting pass, and you at best you can be original in a small way. What might seem staggering to people who aren't working in the area, but your interventions that may seem wild are not very great compared to what's been done.
Yeah. One of your poems mentions a nun. What is it? Something nun? The opening line of it mentions a nun.
Yeah.
Every time I see nun in a poem, I think of Wordsworth. The holy tongue is quiet as a nun. I mean, so that my reading of poetry is also a hearing of other poems. Is that the way you effectively operate as a poet too?
Yeah. Sometimes it's very conscious. That the trouble is with you're in a bind, with this, is that you want to echo, you're happy to echo, but if you echo in certain ways, you could be in trouble legally, right? You're in courts. So even as you say, well, I'm dragging and I'm writing from and with and around other people, you say, what am I going to do here? So you got to be careful. Plagiarism is a problem. You shouldn't be stealing guys' stuff, but it's good to acknowledge and use it. Right?
Is there a lawyer in the crowd? I think that he's just making a plea for defense because there's a lawyer in the background. So we'll get her name later on.
Okay.
So you need
Could you say
sign a book, you get a free book if you give legal advice. But you don't see any of that as a trap. You see that as not just an inevitable way, but a way in which it's generative too. Because as I was looking and reading the book, I was filled with images and sounds I'd heard before, which was a tremendous pleasure, and wasn't about you copying anybody. It was about hearing the trajectory of language and how it's functioned.
Yeah. Well, part of it is, as I was saying a few minutes ago, this is, in one sense, the most traditional book I've ever done, a poetry. Yeah. It's strongly in a kind of imagist and maybe even a romantic tradition. And most of my stuff tends to be looser and more comical and robust and silly.
No, that's interesting because you have worked, I mean, both, as you pointed out, the vernacular, the narrative, and the personal in a different kind of way. Were you surprised by the poet Dennis Cooley that emerged from this?
No, I've done these things too. Like from the very start. I remember having this conversation with Wayne Cassie. Said, looks like you're in a whole new phase of your writing. He said, well, I've been doing it all along. I do all that stuff. And sometimes you do more of it than other times, or a little more, something else emerges. But I think the traces have been there from the very beginning. But I mean, here they're more foregrounded.
Did you play any role in image choice at all, or did you leave that entirely up to Michael?
The images?
Yeah.
I voiced some preferences like here and there, but he was utterly accommodating. He said, "What would you like?" He said, whatever you want to do. I trust supremely trust your instincts and judgment of these things, and I do. Mostly I just look for poems.
The last poem you read, I heard that kind of the terror and the pity. I heard an echo of Rilke's Duino elegies.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
But when you say could be, it's not something you would naturally invoke, but it could be there because the idea is already there in your head.
Well, yeah, it might be. I've never until recently read much Rilke, and I about a year ago finally read something. And in fact, I would tell you the truth, I was kind of hostile to him all along. But I like this book that I read.
Any of you took a course of David, you didn't study Rilke, obviously. That hostile poet. But the first elegy is great. It's a fabulous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got angels in it, and there are angels drifting around inside your book as well.
But it may well be that I had that in my head.
Yeah. the language, and I think Michael would agree that the image making also comes unbidden, right? It isn't something that you orchestrate. It just, it comes into the space, doesn't it?
In all kinds of ways. That's I've seen in some ways that what I've just done now, you can't speak for Michael, is a kind of romantic move. But I believe in inspiration. I always have. But then also you work very hard. And you work very hard to be ready for the inspiration.
Yeah.
So mostly writing is hard work.
Yeah. You don't want to give the idea that it is just a kind of musing any more than Michael would just say, oh, well, I just handed my camera, or I found a Photoshop program and a platform where I could make these things. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is a book that doesn't show the evidence of the intelligence and all the making that might have gone into it. And is that a good thing, that you don't sort of show all that it's not
readiness. I suspect anybody who does anything that involves particular knowledge or skills, they learn how to do well. It's readiness, you know. You do it virtually by instinct, right? You're saying that feels right, because you learn all kinds of stuff, and you make conscious decisions too. I make them all the time. I make usually pretty conscious decisions about line breaks that irritate people, because they often jump in ways that disorient.
One of the things I really admired about your writing in the book is what I think in the introduction called a kind of sound bridging. That you create you give us one line, and that line has a word in it that then in the second line gets echoed 3/4 or half, so that there's a, and the reason I mention that is because one of the tropes or the metaphors that occurred consistent throughout this book in your writing was the metaphor of the needle, the metaphor of the weed, the metaphor of holding things together. Were you aware that so much of the poetry was working inside that conjecture?
Well, I knew I got into the needle as much as anything from robins and spiders, and mosquitoes.
Yeah. The bite.
But nevertheless, I mean, there's your art of fabrication in one kind or another.
And stitching the world together. I mean, so much of the poems talk about that idea of holding disparate things together, that the world could be broken, but it could also be mended somehow.
If you're wounded or whatever, I mean, both, I think what Michael's done and what I've done, I kind of speak in some ways to a world that has been wounded.
Do you want to read one of the poems I love, and it gives me a chance to ask you a couple of questions about sound and how much you may also write for the ear. It's Orchard, which is on, it's not a long poem. It's on page, where's Orchard? It's on page 94.
Okay. This one was composed for the image. One of the half dozen there was.
That's right. It's one you wrote for it. That's one of the things that interests me about it. That's right. Just listen to this poem, audience.
Orchard. Again, could we want to have a rush?
Well, there's the blue and the red. There's the palette.
I know you can't see it back there. Say, hold it up higher.
And bigger. Hold it up higher and bigger.
Yeah. Orchard. When the moon is burnt to charcoal, trees blush with rouge and lipstick, turn bright as cranberry, brighten in apricot, and pear and plum, peach gloss and satin. Their perfume rises on a mascara night. Apples, raspberries, cherries, juices from a windy press, we cherish and suck down. Our voices rising, soft as plums, warm as rum in the lilac air.
That's one of the, I mean, you talk sometimes about a kind of sensorial poetics, that the taste and sound and color of that poem is just extraordinary. Every word seems like it's kind of properly placed in that sensorium.
Oh, taste and see. Denise Levertov, oh, taste and see.
Yeah. I like the rum too. I thought it was good that you put a little bit. I thought it was nice to get a little bit of sea wariness in there at all.
You spoke of the rhymes of the sounds that run through the text. Lots of people get irritated about that.
Too much? You mean that it?
Yeah, it's too much of its own. But I can't resist.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's also kind of stitched. Let's use it. It's a way of holding. It's what.
It's kind of music.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in one of your classes I said, and one of the things you admired about Atwood as a poet, not as a novelist, was her sense of sound leading, that she had a wonderful sense of how one line could curl into the line following it, and that she had a real gift for that tonality. Yeah. Was it T.S. Eliot who said the tone is everything? Does tone make sense to you in this book? It has a real strong sense of tonality, both the images and the prose.
Everything I do. One of my base tones is the jockey-ator figure who jokes and about everything, and especially himself. But I like that tone. I kind of he's kind of smart alecky but good humored.
Yeah, well, it's like what Ondaatje said about Hart Crane. Even his jokes were exceedingly drastic. Some of the poems in here are not so funny.
No.
Well, I mean, the brokenness is apparent, and there's a way in the admirable way in which to try and mend that world is something. You know what? We're going to open the thing up to questions now. I'm sure there are some. I'm just following the rules here. So if anyone has a question, John playing talk show hosts will run over, and then someone beats the person next to them, and that gets filmed, and it makes TV. The way these things go.
Yes, indeed. So I will just remind you all that if you do have a question, please do keep it fairly succinct and phrase it as a question, if I may gently request that. And also, if you happen to be viewing on YouTube, as a number of people are, please do feel free to write any question you might have in the comments.
This one.
Yes.
It's always somebody's brave enough to start it out. It never stops.
So Dennis, how do you know when a poem is done, when it's complete? What are the indicators?
I don't. The poem's never finished. I quote other Autumn and Mallarmé. I think they're both credited for this phrase. A poem is never finished. It's only abandoned. Which sounds slovenly and contemptuous, doesn't it? But it's actually wise, I think. No, thing is, what's a perfect poem? What could you conceive of or think you had such a thing? For me, I could go forever revising. I can make it different, maybe even better. There's this possibility I didn't try out, hence I can rewrite all the time. The poem's never done. And why do you get tired? The editor wants it. You get hungry. You want to have supper. You run out of time, energy, tension, stamina. Bored. You're bored. You want to move on. You don't know what to do with it anymore.
There are people for whom that causes extraordinary anxiety. But clearly not for you, because it's in fact not about completion. It's about the ongoingness.
And make it the very best you can. And that's not an argument for being careless. I mean, I worked very hard on it, revised like crazy, but you got to let it go sometime or other. It's hard to do. See, I'm still working. There's a funny story. You know the story about when we were doing Bloody Jack, many years ago. And the press was going to bring it out, and I was still working on it. And Arneson came in after a while. He said, "Give me that manuscript, Cooley. We're taking it out. They're going to do it." He said, "Well, I'm not done yet." But he just took it anyway. So I never finished. He took my manuscript.
And then 25 years later, you published another version of it anyway. So what the hell's the difference?
Yeah.
You didn't get to keep yours. You quote that one amazing epigraph from Shelley, that poetry lifts the veil of beauty.
Familiarity.
And the idea of beauty. Beauty is a tough word these days, because we so little of it. There is a beauty, obviously, for you, and you're prepared to go after it.
Yeah, well, here, certainly. I generally don't like to use the term, though. For me, it suggests preciosity, I mean, it's not a inevitable or not an inherent part of it. For me, it's that. So I don't like to use it much. The way I see I did, certainly, at least in the last poem, this world that some find terrible and beautiful.
Yeah. Other questions? There's all kinds of writers in the room. Of course, maybe writers don't ask writers questions. They just want to go and drink with them. Question.
Where's Roger Levaille? Roger.
Yes, Dennis.
What should we say?
How do you use any part of the public poems elsewhere?
Yep. Yeah. 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 Well, part of it is I lose track on them too. I mean, just write for many, many years, and you write and revise, and you have stuff everywhere. And I find I've got about 4 lines here that I just put in another book, another chapbook that about almost the same time. I must have really been pleased with it. But yeah, I lose track of them. But I also do it knowingly. Yeah. Do you? Yeah. The best material. Yeah. Well, and you got your best material. You might as well quote yourself. Yeah.
One of the things about this book, though, that I also admire both of you for is that it would be easy to fall into the trap of you describing the images and Michael illustrating your poems. That doesn't happen.
Not remotely.
No, it doesn't happen at all. It's like you're looking for a kind of third interstitial language between the two mediums.
Yeah, again, almost tonal. Is this somehow weight there? Does it fit?
Yeah.
Guesswork. No, it was guesswork. It was instinct almost.
Yeah. Any other question, Christian?
You see, I know some artists talk that over time their works cohere in unusual ways. If you notice connections that you've never seen before in all of your work?
Over time, writers' works tend to cohere in a certain way. In this book, did you?
Yeah, but did you find that there were connections you didn't see in all of your work?
Did you find that there were connections that you didn't see between all of your work that somehow coalesced within this volume?
Well, some things emerge maybe more strongly, but that happens in any book, right? Somebody say, you didn't deal with carrots. No, not in that. There are no carrots in this book. So I have a sense of getting things are always there, and maybe not particularly conspicuous, maybe even to me, but they're there. And all along, I think that this may sound like I never developed or changed, but which is I don't think is true either. But I don't feel I changed all that much. That it's kind of been just doing a lot of different things at different times or at the same time. But that's my answer.
Tennyson has that line, I don't know, it might, which poem it's in exactly, where he says that language half reveals and half conceals the soul within.
Yeah.
As if the transaction is one of both deliberate revelation and maybe equally deliberate withholding of things. Do you sense when you talk about this being more lyric, and how much revelation and how much concealment do you think there might have been? It picks up on Christian's question really about what you learned about yourself from these particular poems, whether or not this vernacular character that created this kind of boisterous guy who's always making jokes, not very far below the surface of that is a guy who's so desperately in love with the world and people and doesn't want to admit it too clearly.
Yeah, well, it's kind of coaching a thought like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But those poems are there. I mean, they're tender poems all along. These, if you're a writer, I'm sure anybody writes here. Got to say this. Like, what do you read every reading, and why do you read those pieces? You may have different reasons, but I tell you, my reasons tend to be: I want to read something that I think I can read well. I want something I hope that some people might like, and say, how do you guess that? Well, you've had some experience of that. Laughter is probably the most appealing thing in the world, though not for critics often, because that's infantile and immature. But you read, select things that are somewhere there that you like to read and think might work. And you all have seen this just now. When I get emotional poems, I'm in trouble, so I don't read them.
And we are just at the top of the hour. So if Robert, if you have a final question, or if you folks would like to wind down with any closing comments you might have.
No, I'm out of questions.
And Dennis, do you have any closing comments at all?
Well, thanks to all coming. It's very good of you to do this. I whatever pleasures you may take in this, I do as well. But I also find readings and launches very hard work in the audience. I find it much harder being in the audience than being the reader. It's exhausting listening. I didn't get that. Things are by. So anyway, thanks for coming so much. And whoever may be on the other end, I do know some foolish people in Germany who swear that they're listening right now. So here's to the foolish people in Germany and wherever else they may be. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. We'll now be moving along to the signing portion of the evening. So as previously mentioned, we'll ask you all to remain in your seats for just one moment while we move Dennis along to the table. After a few breaths, please do feel free to follow us along. There are copies of the book that are available for sale right at our cash desk, so you don't need to wander around the store seeking them out. They are right there. So we do ask, just in this case, because the store is closed, that you please do visit the cash desk. Please rest assured, for all those furtively looking at their watches, we will not kick you out. It will be ample time to get into the signing line. All we ask is that you do purchase your book before you get there, and then that way you can take your time with Dennis at the table and then slowly wander out. Otherwise, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here physically today. I'd like to thank everybody who was viewing on YouTube, who chimed in with such effusive and encouraging comments. And otherwise, I'd like you all to join me in a round of applause for At Bay Press, the publisher, Michael Matthews in absentia for his incredible abstract photography, Robert Enright, your host, and of course, Dennis Cooley. Have a lovely evening all.